Hi, I'm Lori Hartman. I'm with New York Theological Center, and I'm the director of one of our research centers, the Center for the Study and Practice of Urban Religion. We call it CSPUR for short. Together with my co-director and faculty research director, Dr. Moses Biney, we do studies on religion in urban settings. So we came upon the thought that from our practice and our experience that the face of the city is changing. And we wondered if urban ministry was changing to keep up with that change. And so we looked and we thought that that urban ministry is in a real crisis right now because we're really practicing from some old templates and some older formats. And so we thought about what does it look like to do urban ministry in this, what the city looks like today across the country. And we embarked upon a project with funding from the Arthur Vining Davis Foundations on a 3-year project to revitalize urban ministry in theological education. And it's a study that takes a look at what does ministry look like in the city, what does the city look like, what's going on, and to focus on a couple of themes. We started with a survey of the ATS schools and member schools, and we looked at what type of theological education that they were offering in urban ministry. So we're still processing that information, but we wanted to start with what's happening in now. What we did notice, though, preliminarily, is that most of the programs are separate and apart from the foundation of this theological education. So it's still kind of hanging off the side. It's still kind of mission related. It's still kind of how can we save those people and feed the homeless and look at just kind of overlying issues. So we embarked upon a process, a plan to take a look at what urban ministry looks like across the country. So we isolated 4 areas, not really isolated, but we selected 4 regions in the country to take a look at across specifically what is urban in urban ministry. We began our consultation process with that question, and we took that question to Chicago Theological Seminary in Chicago. And we brought together theologians, scholars, sociologists to take a look at not specifically Chicago, but to use Chicago as a model to see what is changing within the city. And what we found out was that urban was almost impossible to define clearly. And that it changes with the context of where you are, and it changes even within the city of the locality of the city in which we were presenting. So we found that even in Chicago, some of the urban places and urban people were displaced to rural places and took their urban issues with them. Now, does that new place, does that suburb now become urban, and the issues seem to be migrating throughout the city? So we left there without a clear definition of what is urban, but with a clear understanding that it is diverse and that it's relative to the context in which we are located. And then we looked at what is the ministry in urban ministry. So what does ministry look like in these cities? And we took that consultation to Los Angeles. And we partnered with the New Theological Seminary of the West and held our consultation at Second Baptist Church in Santa Ana, California. And we went there with an understanding of we're from New York, so we went there with the understanding of what does the city look like for New Yorkers. And we got there, we brought our East Coast city mentality with us to the West Coast, and it was completely different. Los Angeles has cities within cities, and it was sprawling, and it was spread out, and it didn't look very urban to me, but it had some real urban issues. And the people that were gathered for the consultation, even within the room, their issues were varied, their concerns were varied. Some were more concerned about immigration because there was a big immigration issue there. Some with racism, violence, homelessness. So it was just completely varied. And so what does ministry look like? It was varied as well. And so, but it was particular to the different needs and areas within the cities within a city. And we're still compiling all of this information that we got from this research so that we can use it later. But we took our third conversation to Wesley Theological Seminary in Washington, D.C., where we looked at building bridges in the city. From what we found and what is ministry and what the needs are, we took a look at how do we build bridges within the city across these issues of sexism, homophobia, xenophobia, racism. And what we found there was overwhelmingly the conversation turned to gentrification. It did in Chicago as well, but the changing demographic was really profound, even in the area of Wesley Theological Seminary, which we were told used to be Chinatown, but completely did not even look like any kind of Chinatown. It was urban and up and trendy and up and coming, and there were $1 million condos all around, but I understand that it wasn't always like that. So gentrification was a big issue, and the changing demographic of the city is nothing new. But the way that it's happening nowadays is something that's new. People are feeling pushed out. They're not given very many options in the way that the cities are changing. Which then took us to Cities on the Move, our fourth consultation, and we looked at migration and global urbanization. And we took that conversation to Perkins School of Theology at Southern Methodist University in Dallas. And we looked specifically at immigration. Gentrification was still an issue, but we looked at, we partnered with their Center for the Study of Latina Ministry in their research center. And we partnered with them and we talked to them about what they're experiencing with regard to immigration. So they have a large Mexican population, but they also have a lot of Hispanics from all over Latin America. There's a large African population there. And so we put together a couple of panel discussions, and we got some information from them to talk about what does ministry look like in these places to people, the new people who are coming in. Residency status was one of the things that was of most concern. How do we help people who are here, working here, or undocumented, and can't even communicate back home for fear that they will be found out where they are? How do we mix all of these different, is there truly a melting pot amongst our immigrant populations? And we found that no, there isn't really. No one wanted to melt. Everyone wanted to stay in their culture and then kind of blend occasionally on holidays and different occasions, but there was really no melting. I think America is becoming not so much the melting pot, but just a place of multiculturalism where we're all together, but we remain in our cultures. And so we wrapped up our last consultation in Perkins on April 8th and 9th. We're still putting together some of that information, and we're going to use that as we move toward planning our 2016 conference, where we then take these issues and continue the conversation with the different scholars and theologians and academic people to talk about what is theology in the city. We kind of looked at ministry on the front line, but what is the bigger picture? What does theology look like in the city, and how do we address the economic disparities and from a heavenly perspective? We will continue working, looking at the city and looking at our sustainability and what does that look like, and with our environmental stability within the city. So we're going to be doing a couple of brown bag luncheons at the seminary with regard to that. We're involved in the People's Climate March in the city. And we're going to continue to convene our National Planning Committee and as we plan our 2016 conference. Our overall objective is to suggest a curriculum, a model for a curriculum for urban ministry, and introduce an ATS standard or recommendation for an ATS standard, and an introductory textbook that is relevant and current to what our issues are now. So, thank you. Any questions? We're going to do the conference in New York City at New York Theological Seminary in the city. In May of 2000, it's actually going to be June, the first week of June. We'll make sure we get your information to let you know exactly when that's going to be.
Our conversations happen.
2016, a year from now. Did I say that? 2016, I'm sorry.
Yes. The dialogues that are taking place in the different conferences, are they including interfaith dialogue?
It's been primarily a Christian conversation. We did invite some people from different faiths. Some people can't come, so we've got a few atheists. So it's been it's been primarily a Christian conversation, but not by design. We didn't plan it that way. Yeah. And we're hoping to bring more of an interfaith piece to our conference in 2016.
I want to start by saying just a word of thanks for being here, but also a word of thanks to Warren Giddens on behalf of all of us for an extraordinary career. Your legacy here is secure, but your legacy beyond here is also very, you've been a contribution to all of us in theological education, not only nationally, but around the globe. So thank you, Warren, for who you are and what you are. I introduced Warren one time to a friend by saying that he was somebody who really loved cities. And it got translated back, he's an urbane lover. But you really are a lover of the cities, and I think that that's an important place to start. All of us up here really are people who love the city and think that the city is just intrinsic to who we are as people of faith and who we are as human beings. Cities exist in different forms on every continent, throughout all parts of human history. I would say that the city is fundamental to who we are as human beings, and the city is fundamentally religious, and I'm going to argue that religion is fundamentally an urban city affair. Human beings, I think, are hardwired to create cities. It's in our DNA, just like that we're hardwired for language. And we don't build cities because we were human. We build cities in order to be human. We build cities and we occupy them and we transform them and renew them in order to find our own humanity. Here at the beginning of the 21st century, this has become a pressing issue because cities have become, and urbanization has become one of the driving forces, the other side of globalization, as a global phenomenon. And that's really what brings us to this question that we're giving to the panel today as we start and look ahead. Where do we go for such a time as this? What's down the road? And what kind of things do we need to hear as we send Warren off into the next phase of his career, which he will continue to challenge all of us and to keep us on target for doing our work in the cities. We have three panelists. The first is Katie Day, who is the Charles Sheeran Professor of Church and Society at Lutheran Theological Seminary at Philadelphia. The second is Reverend Dr. Ronald Peters. She's Reverend Dr. Katie Day. The second is Reverend Dr. Ronald Peters, who served as the Henry Hillman Professor of Urban Ministry and was the founding director of the Pittsburgh Theological Seminary's Metro Urban Institute. The third is Dr. Roland Angelin, who is the director, I believe, of the Joseph C. Conwell Center for Metropolitan Studies at Rutgers University, Newark, and is a political scientist who's joining the conversation to keep us honest to what cities are actually about. And so I turn it over to them. Each panelist is going to speak for 10 minutes or so. I'm going to give them a chance to talk among themselves, and then we'll open it up for conversation with the whole community.
So Warren referred to this meeting that took place, and I'm going to do a little backstory. In 1997, the Presbyterian Church came up with a grant to bring people from 15 seminaries together in New Mexico to talk about what we were all doing in terms of formation for urban ministry.
Phil Tom funded that.
And Phil Tom funded that, so I want to shout out to Phil.
Amen.
Who is now Department of Labor in making connections with faith-based groups around labor issues, but is soon to come back to parish ministry in Bronx. Yes, so we're pleased about that. So we had this meeting, and it was very exciting, and we had lots of energy, and out of this meeting came this journal article back in '97, and I remember it was the first time that I really collaborated online. So we were sending each other our drafts and corrections online, and I was very nervous. And so, doesn't that seem like long ago? But in this article, we were trying to capture what came out of the conversations. We first of all rehearsed some of the history of urban ministry, and we're indebted to Cliff Green and to George Younger, who have documented the history of urban ministry in the U.S. and the training programs, and up through the industrial missions of the 40s, the East Harlem Protestant Parish that Bill Weber was involved in, and then New York Theological Seminary, of course, Scoop, and the many other programs. So in this article, we honor those, and I think it's important to recognize that we are not just freshly arrived from Mars to invent urban ministry for cities that we've never seen or thought about. So we are part of a process. But we also stressed in that article that urban ministry and therefore the training for urban ministry have to mirror each other. So even as cities are changing, and that means, as Lori said, that urban ministries change, so we in theological education have to make sure that we are, in fact, equipping people for these changing realities. At that time, we stressed that urban ministry and training for urban ministry has to be interdisciplinary, that is, bringing in sociology. I'm a sociologist, so I always say that first. Political science, economics, urban planners. We have to work together. We're not working in a vacuum. So we call for interdisciplinary, and then contextual, experiential education, even as urban ministry is contextual and experiential. And I know that this is something Warren has particularly modeled, that the city is not just a laboratory, the city is the classroom. So, so you learn to do not only text analysis, but community analysis, and that's something that we have continued. So after our article, and we also call for a reframing. So much of the time the church has seen cities in pathological terms. That is just one bundle of needs. And then that puts the church in relation to the city as the problem solver, and the city as the client. So how many of you have heard churches say, I want to find out the community's needs so we can meet those needs? Well, those are loaded with just assumptions that are not true. So we challenged that and called for reframing. Then Robert Kemper had, after that, an article in which he surveyed theological education and looked at how many programs. So, Lori, I'm really looking forward to what your findings are from ATS, because he found in 1997 that of the ATS schools, 1/3 offered at least one course in urban ministry. And these were usually seminaries in the Midwest, Chicago particularly, and in the Northeast. And 19 schools had concentrations in metro urban ministry, DMINs, there were institutes, centers, consortia. So this was the state of where we were in 1997. Now, much has changed. We had great hopes that we were going to have this consortium, that we were going to standardize, and in fact, Ron Peters produced a textbook in urban ministry, which is foundational and filled a very, very important niche, and we're still grateful for that book. But think of all the things that have happened since 1997. and think of the cultural shifts, think of what has happened in churches, think of the decline in religious participation and in denominations, think about the pressures on theological education. I know our seminary is under a lot of pressure. Of course, I'm looking at this beautiful new building and thinking, wow, we're doing pretty well. But there are new realities, and I would like to highlight 4 things that I think are new realities that we have to incorporate in our training for urban ministry. The first was mentioned a few minutes ago, and that is interfaith. And we wrote this article before 9/11. And we learned after 9/11 that religion really matters, that interfaith dialogue is not just something we should do because it's a nice civic virtue, but it's a matter of survival. That religion runs very deep and fuels conflicts and can be a source of conflict and division as well as reconciliation. Diana pointed out to us that we are living in the most religiously pluralistic context anywhere at any time in human history. So we need to be able to develop skills and understandings of how to engage people of other faith traditions. And that's just not negotiable. The second area is physical space, buildings. I'm not sure about you, but in our seminary, students can go through a whole MDiv, never hear about buildings, and then they go out and they have this big old building that is using a lot of resources. So we, in Philadelphia, I'm part of a study looking at 650 crumbling old church buildings, religious buildings. So how do we think about buildings theologically? And many of these old buildings have anchored neighborhoods for hundreds of years. Many of them are threatening the safety of the neighborhood because they're crumbling. What is good stewardship of these buildings? How am I doing? Okay, good. All right. So I teach a course in Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and of course Dietrich Bonhoeffer 70 years ago wrote from prison that he saw a future in which we were going to have to think about a religionless Christianity because the church had failed so miserably. We were going to have to reimagine what Jesus means for us today in our places, apart from the infrastructure of the church as we knew it then. And it's, it seems so prescient that here we are. And he called for getting rid of our buildings, and so what would that mean? What is our relationship to our buildings, and what is good stewardship? The third area, and this has also been modeled by Lori and what's happening out of New York Theological Seminary, and that is we have to become a lot more engaged in research about faith communities in cities. And I say this as a researcher and one who has done a lot of research on how communities of faith function in urban ecologies. So it's not, we don't just study congregations in isolation, but how are they engaged in the ecology? How are they shaping the ecology and being shaped by it? And we have to understand that. And one thing that I have found is that religion in cities is invisible to policymakers and to planners and to developers. They don't see it. In fact, developers think that too many churches are a sign of blight. Communities like Evanston, Illinois, try to zone out the development of any more storefront churches because they thought it was blight. They don't pay taxes, they don't hire a lot of people, they don't generate a lot of street traffic, so what good are they, right? So that's when they were paying attention, but usually they just don't. And so I think research helps not only for us to understand how faith is functioning in urban context, but can raise the profile of these vital, if invisible, community institutions. And then finally, I have been inspired, and particularly by the death of John Steinbrück. I don't know, did anybody know John Steinbrück? Is that name? He was a prophetic, curmudgeonly, never giving up urban pastor in Washington, D.C. And back in the 70s, in this fancy, place church in Thomas Circle, said to people, Jesus said, we've got to, we have to house people. People are homeless. So he talked his congregation into bringing homeless people in, but then advocating, and they developed a whole program. And it's, made me think, where is the next generation of prophetic ministry coming from? And when we look at all we have to say are a few code words: Ferguson, Baltimore, and what we know is that we, just by saying those, we realize that we can look back on 1997, and now that's the good old days, right? So, so cities, when we say those, we realize we're thinking about this this complex, toxic cocktail of injustice, in which poverty and racism and poor education and lack of opportunity and mass incarceration and political disenfranchisement all are mixing together to entrench injustice. And so inequality, social distance, is worse now than it was when we read our article. And so I feel that we have to be dedicated to finding ways to form creative, smart, courageous, collaborative leaders who are, like Dr. Dennis, are going to be in it for the long haul.
But like most of us, I feel like I'm in one of those 7 last words preaching contests. And I can't say too much about Warren. He's a brother to me. Our relationship goes back way beyond the publication of our joint article. That was, sort of the culmination. But Warren and I go back to the early 70s. And if you are one of these people who follow, give some attention to journey theology, I thank Jesus because of the fact that God sends people in your life to walk with you. And he's been my road dog in this journey of life for a very long time. And I thank God for him. Somebody came in and told me, oh yeah, he always talks about you as a mentor. And I said, I'm very generous because we mentor one another. We share. There's hardly an idea in this book that I wrote on urban ministry that we didn't bounce it back out. I wrote and got a lot of ideas on it, probably with the Northex out there. That used to be his living room. And I stayed with him a while. And so this is my brother. Just a brother in Christ and a friend and it's an honor to be here. So he's the only one who I could drive all night to. Another reason I drove all night is because in addition to being to establishing the Metro Urban Institute, which we talked about as I went to Pittsburgh Seminary to do that, and maybe a year or so after he comes here, and we work together and we talk about establishing the doctoral program here. For 20 years, I did that for 19 and a half years, and then in 2010 I went to be president of the Interdenominational Theological Seminary in Atlanta, ITC. And I did that for 3 years. I had enough fun, and I stopped. What was interesting, and I'll say more about that. And so now, these days, I came back to Pittsburgh Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and I find myself working with my successor there in an international project called the Transatlantic Roundtable on Religion and Race. And teaching again at Pittsburgh Seminary as an adjunct. But in addition to that, I am now what's called a theologian in residence at Grace Memorial Presbyterian Church in Pittsburgh, PA. Something I took on last June, consciously, because I'm in the process of updating the textbook that I wrote 7 years ago, Urban Ministry. A lot, as Katie has said, has changed in the last 7 years. And so this was one of the, and often ministry in the ATS accredited schools is following a strange model. Unlike physicians, some of your best physicians associated with teaching hospitals, or in the area of law, some of your best lawyers are associated with schools of law. We operate in accredited theological schools under the illusion that people should withdraw from life in ministry and come and sit in some seminary for years, apart from feet on the ground. And that's what's unique about urban ministry and what we're trying to do in urban ministry. And I grew up in the segregated South and in Louisiana, and wound up at a seminary in New England, Gordon Conwell, the year that Martin King was assassinated. And I was shocked, and I say this in my textbook, I was shocked that while troops were all over Boston and Memphis and Atlanta and DC and New York and these places, in the cities, nothing was said about it on the campus in 1968 when I went to class or seminary. That was going on in the city. We were in the cloister of the academic community, theological academy. And that was the thing, the linchpin, which got me prompted into why is the discussion in the classroom, the theological classroom, about God and Jesus so isolated from the questions that people on the street are raising about God and Jesus. Why can't I pay my rent? You know, why is it we can't get a grand jury to convict a cop for murder? These kinds of on the street issues. And so this us and them thing, I can talk a long time, particularly when I'm sleeping, I got to go. But I'm trying to make it real and put it in terms of this. My love-hate relationship with the academy is old. And it grew out of my seminary experience, and I can talk to a lot of people who talk mournfully about their seminary experience because it didn't prepare them for what they needed to do in the streets when they got into the pulpit. And so why I'm not surprised that back in the day when churches run into trouble in their neighborhood and neighborhoods change, they don't know what to do except jump in line and go somewhere else, because they don't know how to deal with what's there. Long story short, friends, I've come to the determination, the position, which I began to argue in my book, that the bottom line for urban ministry is reconciliation.
Amen.
That's it. And this is why what Dale said about, there's no real difference between, ministry is ministry. But the problem is, secular society has convinced us that, well, I'll put it this way, our theology is bad. One of the problems I found in the academy was that there was no room to talk about urban ministry. The only reason we've been pushing the envelope, and you know who the pusher is, because she told me who the Calvinists is. The Calvinists. Pushing the envelope on urban ministry is because when I go to a guild meeting, AAR, American Academy of Religion, Society of Biblical Literature, I look in vain for a discussion on urban ministry or a group. You know, you can get in the Tillich group, or you can get in the Barthian group at AAR, or you can get into the ethics group, or so forth. There's no urban ministry group. Close thing I can do, I bounce back between black theology and sociology of religion. You and sociologists, my background is in education, preparation of leadership and teaching models, and this is in history. And so when we go to AAR, probably wound up at sociology of religion or history. I would go either to ethics or black theology, because nobody talked about urban ministry. So that's why we were trying to invent a category. I'm sorry to report that I'm also on the board of the, and I'm not sorry to report that I'm on the board. The reason I'm on the board of the Association of Theological Schools is because I'm trying in the way to see, can our accredited theological education be retrofitted to address the needs of society in a way which is conciliatory and healing?
Amen.
Amen.
We maintain this us and them because our theology is bad. I am saved and sanctified, and they are sinners. And this is why we don't know what to do with urban ministry. We always talk about giving people examples. In my textbook I said we need core values in urban ministry. Core values are inspired by what you believe, what you think, and what you think about God. And therefore, this us and them, either in the politics of division. And so we divide everything, male versus female. You know, we butt heads. Was at yesterday and just heard some statistics that are verified by what Katie said, and I'm going to stop shortly, but I wanted to share these with you. Most theological schools are in trouble. She said 1/3 have at least a course on seminary, at least a course. Much of that 1/3 has only a course. And that was in 97. It hadn't changed. It's gotten worse. But the whole enterprise of theological education is in trouble. 2/3 of theological schools are in financial crisis. Enrollment is down. And one of the reasons why New Brunswick Property can build a new building and look at the audience in here. This is not what theological education looks like.
Well,
It is still largely white, but that's changing too. Next year, for the first time in the history of the association, more than half of the FTE, the full-time students, will be now money. Largely by athletes and people of color, Latinos, blacks. That's going up, that's changing. I can say more about the demographic, but when you pair, because one of the things I want to look at in updating this is income inequality. I told you I grew up in the segregated South of New Orleans, and there was an old adage when I grew up. When the economy of the majority community catches a cold, the black community gets pneumonia. I could say the same for Latinos. Just look at the statistics. Whether it's economics, whether it's health statistics, whether it's environmental, pollution or whatever. This is the chart, us and them. Look at the cities. 7 billion people in the world, half of them in cities. And while we can see some of the good in our society about camouflaging the dichotomies, there are ugly places where it's right, and this us and them thing can degenerate not only into Ferguson and Baltimore, but it's rooted in our theology. Why is there a huge wall, God knows how thick and how high, that runs right through Jerusalem? You have to get privileges to go through in there. Well, how is that different from Ireland, where neighborhoods are carved up in similar situations? And this ethnic, name an area back in the day, Croatia versus, say, Serbia, or Rwanda, Tutsis versus Hutus. It's not new. I was teaching in the backwoods of Nigeria in 2006 with one of my former students. And I saw burned out churches. I saw what Boko Haram was doing then. I had to be escorted from where I was teaching back in the backwoods to Abuja in the airport by armed guards. Somebody sitting next, because of ethnic and religious affiliation. Well, what has all of this to do with urban ministry? What this politics of division does, and this again is why I suggested in the book that we need a new theology, because I was more timid 7 years ago than I am now. I'm old and retired, and I've been freed. I suggested then this pyramid relationship that we see in society, where the very privileged in society are up at the apex, the top of the pyramid, but as you go down, those who are less privileged, and when you get to the bottom, the wide part, you've got a lot of those undocumented, they're documented, they're in jail. They're not at the apex, they're not in the halls of Congress, they're not on the boards of the Fortune 500. Those are the ones who got the Bentleys. And when you get to the bottom, these are the people who are puffing it. Got the hoopty. But I'm not talking about class division. Ours is not a politics of division, it's a politics of reconciliation. We have been given a gospel.
Amen.
Yes, we
Of
have.
reconciliation. How do we address these inequities? And if our theological institutions, which are skewed to the wealthy, look at, I won't call the names, but there are some hugely wealthy theological institutions. I was a part of one. Just received $20-some billion endowment gift. You could endow all of the black theological schools in ATS for $20 million. This income inequity is one of the reasons why Dr. Dennis, Dr. Day, Dr. Urban, Ronald Peters, and others have been fighting for 20 years to get theological education to recognize the academic validity of the city and its need to be credentialed with a program in theological education. So this is our challenge, and he's not going to think about our shut up. We, in addition to mentoring, in addition to working across the interdenominational lines, we have to build a theology of reconciliation
Amen.
that does away with the elect versus the damned. All right? We have to build a theology that recognizes that what Jesus does is inverts the triangle. Whosoever will, Jesus wants everybody to be saved.
Amen.
Doesn't want anybody lost. And that's what we have to do now. The boots on the ground is our task in terms of doing it. And it is this kind of, this is the task that is before us. One of the challenges, and I'll give you, and I'll close with this, because it's very personal. I took this position of working. I asked them to call me theologian in residence because all I wanted to do was preach on Sunday and rewrite the book. I didn't have time for pastoral care. So I thought, God has I hadn't been at the church 2 months before one of the daughters of the church was brutally murdered, execution style, in front of her home, and her mother shot as well. What I'm supposed to do, say, well, that's not on the job description. But what it has done is began to look at a church that is reorganized the church. That when I left in 2010, left Pittsburgh in 2010, had an average Sunday attendance of 250. When I got back, for some reason, that shouldn't be famous now, was down to 77, basically a church split. And so, they were glad to see 40 people on Sunday. And so we're creeping back up. But the issue is, the reason we're creeping back up is because we have to go out and deal with the gun violence on the street.
Amen.
Amen. The drive-by bullet isn't going to ask me whether I'm Presbyterian or not. We have to deal with reconciliation, and it's class and race. And this is our challenge. We can say what we
Good morning.
Good morning.
Buenos dias.
My name is Roland Anglin, and first I want to thank Warren Dennis for asking me to sit on this panel. It's not often that I am in these types of venues and panels, and it is stretching me, quite frankly. The question before us is, how do we keep the conversation going in urban... The question, can you hear me?
Yes.
Well, the question before us is, how do we keep the conversation going in urban theological education and ministry? I'd like to amend that a little bit, because I am not an expert in urban theological ministry as a curriculum. I'm more interested in why we should keep it going. I come at this admittedly from a secular perspective, but it's not related to the question at hand. I study the challenge of cities and neighborhoods in a globalized world. Bringing it even down more to the ground, I am passionate about creating opportunities for marginalized people and the places in which they reside. My applied research work and active engagement coincides and supports my work as the director of the Joseph C. Cornwall Center for Metropolitan Studies at Rutgers University, Newark. We work on issues of economic and community development, post-secondary attainment, workforce development, and housing. Again, we work from both the vantage point of actively engaged scholarship and direct intervention. A good example of what we do in these two parts, we do studies on upward mobility, why folks don't achieve good incomes, get a good education. We do all that with census data, we do that with focus groups, all the tools in what I call traditional social science. But we're not satisfied with that. At least I am not satisfied with that. For all that we do in active scholarship, we must do in direct intervention, the best we can given our institutional values and mission. What does that really mean? A good example of that is we are working with all of the higher educational institutions in Newark to create a pipeline for kids in Newark to go from K to college.
Amen.
That is a very difficult proposition, and again, we work within the parameters of what we can do. So we get the higher eds together, we get the local college access groups together, we do a lot of convening, we do a lot of technical assistance, and we hope that we are saving the world. And I do hope that some of these efforts are impactful and important. But they are after the fact. And they don't get at the fundamental challenges faced by those working in poverty alleviation in an urban context. We, and I say we, but it's really us, we don't have a way to talk about the historical legacy of slavery. We don't have a way to talk about forced marches, segregation towards people of color, many of whom reside in post-industrial cities like Newark, seeking to regain economic relevance. Yes, I am not a fool. I know that we use in social science and political rhetoric phrases such as structural racism to get at this legacy. But even though this term is useful in articulating a process at some top level outcomes, for example, we can talk about disparities in health, we can talk about disparities in housing, we can talk about disparities in assets through structural racism. But we don't really, if we're honest with each other, have a language and metric to describe the feelings and actions of people caught up in transgenerational poverty and family dissolution.
That's right.
My simplistic view of what is transpiring in many of our urban places is spiritual alienation.
Wow.
Now, funny coming from a diehard social scientist. But the reality is, folks are disconnected from the needed supports that allow us as human beings to build a spiritually whole human being. These supports are simple: nurturing, mentoring, healthy family relationships and community life, and yes, financial security. My sense is that theology, along with other fields such as social psychology, can help us approach these knotty questions that we don't have answers to. Again, truth be told, my work has no real means for deliberating how justice and equity result in an integrated, reified human soul. I believe theology can help in this regard. What Warren Dennis and many of you in this room has done is to bring in various theological traditions important to urban ministry and have helped us to understand their relevance to the metaphorical place that I've now discovered called Zion. Yes, there is balm in Gilead, but it's up to us to unpack how to make this relevant in urban communities. The theological traditions that Warren and others have infused in this work and teaching us just how it is just as relevant now as when he first taught his first class. We have to keep the conversations going around such questions, the questions the quest for personal and community justice, economic equality. For without these questions, we have incomplete people, we have incomplete communities, and we have an incomplete democracy. So Warren, thank you so much for your work, your life's work, and I salute you.
Retirement celebrations simultaneously of the Presbyterian Church. Presbyterian Church going down. Going down a little bit, so I want to acknowledge I saw an email this morning. It said Pastor Emeritus, the Reverend Robert Burkins. Bob Burkins and I, Reggie Jackson and I were in seminary together in 1996. I think Robert finished in 97. So he's kind of like a senior above me. Yeah, but I appreciate it. We go through some interesting journeys together in the Lord. Okay, Howard. Before we give it back to Dale.
You can help me sing this song. You can't have church without singing sometimes. And then when I sing, my soul is a witness for my Lord. Soul is a witness for my Lord. Well, my soul is a witness for my Lord. My soul is a witness for my Lord. When you read in the Bible and you understand, but through love was the old man. He lived to be 199, and he died and went to heaven in due time. I'm a little witness for my Lord. 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 When you read it in the Bible, then you understand. Samson was a strong man. He went out a little too fine, and he killed about 1,000 Philistines. The life of Samson this week knows but the whole Bible doesn't tell me so. He shaved his head just between his hands. Samson's strength became the lily of the man. Samson is a witness for my Lord. Samson is a witness for my Lord. I say Samson is a witness for my Lord. Samson is a witness for my Lord. When Daniel was a Hebrew child, he went to pray to the Lord for a while. The king soon for Daniel to sin. He put him right down in the lion's den. Was with the angels the lion to keep. And Daniel lay down and he went to sleep. Now Daniel is a witness for my Lord. Daniel is a witness for my Lord. I say Daniel is a witness for my Lord. Daniel is a witness for my Lord. When deep without the water of the mighty clay, then I'm going to solid what to say. My Lord did just what he said. He healed the sick and he raised the dead. Died on the cross to save my soul. He ransomed me and he made me whole. Now I am a witness for my Lord. I am a witness for my Lord. Oh, I am a witness for my Lord. I am a witness for my Lord. Will you be a witness for my Lord? I want you to get on your feet now for my Lord. And raise your head high now for my Lord. Because you want a witness for my Lord.
I want to give the panel members there's a chance first, if there's anything you'd like to follow up with each other, you might have to hear your conversation, and then I'm just going to open it right back up to the community at large.
One of the things, we really hadn't talked very much before we got together, and Warren kind of said, say whatever you want to say. And one of the things that was remarkable to me was the differences, but also the themes. And one of the themes of income inequality and how that is something that is an increasingly entrenched, an increasing reality, and increasingly something that we have to be able to address in our congregations. And I really appreciate the depiction of income inequality as being attendant with spiritual alienation, because I think that the spiritual alienation that has resulted from among people who do not see the poor, for whom the poor are invisible, is a deep spiritual wound that has to be addressed.
I too am grateful for, I want to say Reverend England, but it's Dr. England's comments, and his emphasis on the importance of this addressing the spiritual alienation. One of the things I've come to realize in our pedagogical processes is that, as I say, when the passing of information gets separated from caring, the quality of life is reduced. Information is intended to be shared in the context of caring. This is one of the reasons why slaves were able to learn to read even when it was illegal to teach them to read, because people cared enough to give them the tools they needed for survival. One of the real downfalls about so much of our educational processes is that we have people who pass for teachers who don't care about the students. Paulo Freire talked about that in Pedagogy of the Oppressed in no kind of way a long time ago. And the thing that's scary in our society is that, and I worry about theological education, because so much of our theological education, someone was kind enough to say, because I made the statement that, theological education don't do it, but there are notable exceptions. This one, with this program and so forth. And what, we've tried to do here, Dale and Katie, and there are others, there are notable exceptions. But by and large, accrediting agencies, whether theological or secular, set these standards on the passing of information. So now, things that we grew up with, and for example, when I was a kid, I used to always get insulted, when I come home from playing, and they said, well, go brush your teeth, your breath stink, or, bathe. But that's teaching, that taught me how to deal with personal hygiene, and I could take that because it came from my mother or my older brother or sister, because I knew they cared about me and my survival. What happens when sharing of information becomes, in our society, intellectual property, where you have to pay, whether in cyberspace or in the classroom, to get information for survival? The separation of caring. And we have to be careful about how we reintegrate the sharing of information with people with whom we care. And so thank you, Doc, for lifting that quality, because I see it also in our church institutions, where we go through rituals, but the rituals have become separated from the agape that they were intended to convey.
Well, I'll just briefly say that it's an honor for me to sit on a panel with committed individuals. And I hope that the dialogue between quote unquote the social sciences and the scientists that deal with theology can talk more. Because I think we have a lot to offer to each other. And without each other, we're nothing. We're nothing but just people talking about useless things when the world is crashing about us. So I'm thankful.
Let me open it up to you all. I do ask that when you would stand and just say your name, but please remember, this is not a chance to join the panel, but to ask a question, a brief question, and we'll give them a chance to continue the conversation. You want to use a microphone?
Dr. D, I feel like I'm back in our seminars for urban ministry in the DVIN program. My name is Dr. Melva J. Hayden, proud alum of NBTS's DVIN program. Name it and claim it. I think I've heard more than one of you say that the definition of urban ministry is fluid. It also hasn't really been named or defined clearly. And my question is that, will that be harmful or helpful in the fight and the movement to incorporate urban ministry into the traditional ATS, model and so forth? If you know how to define something, it suggests to me in some ways that it's more meaningful, if I'm making sense. Anybody can answer that.
If urban ministry is anything, it is plural and inclusive. And so the ministry in the plural and inclusive kind of context that is intrinsically interdisciplinary, interfaith, and intensive, because what defines the city, as Dr. Irvin has said, is the people. All right, you can have buildings and bridges and edifices, but if there are no people, you don't have a city. And so that's what makes it work. And cities are plural as opposed to less plural areas, which tend to be more homogeneous. So when you come into the city, you've got conflicting values, ethnicities, and so I see this as inclusively.
It's messy.
Yeah.
So you see it as an advantage?
Oh yes, rather than we tend to see ourselves competitively. You understand? I work over here, you work over there. Hierarchically, this kind of thing, and it is intended to be more of what Paul so frequently defined as the body of Christ. The hand cannot, the eye cannot is less without the hand, and vice versa.
Can I just say that I think sometimes when we go into an institution or a denomination or ATS or someplace and say, we have to enhance our offerings in urban ministry. And then the discussion begins with, well, what do you mean by urban? And then that can just, that question has been ongoing for 25 years, and it's a delaying tactic. So I think I just go in and say, okay, I'm going with the SMSA, I'm going with the definition of urban that is used by cities and, used by the government, and it's flawed, it doesn't capture everything, but we've got to just pick a definition and then let's get going.
Amen.
I'm going to join the panel and add something there real quick. For those of you who are in theological education, in the 1990s, ATS launched an enormous project called Globalization of Theological Education and spent a huge amount of money sending theological educators all over the world to meet difference. So instead of just going down the street, people were going off to India and Latin America and not dealing with the fact that difference is right here. One of the things, the project we've been trying to do is to get ATS, there are 2 standards in ATS that require a school to address globalization. You cannot get accredited without addressing globalization today. There are no standards on urbanization. And so you can be accredited and not have anything in your curriculum that addresses the city, but you can't do it without addressing globalization. And that's been the problem here. You go overseas to meet the difference, you don't walk across the street. Okay, back to my moderator role, thank you. We have a question back here and then we'll go up here next.
Good morning, my name is Dolores Joffrey, and I'm definitely secular, and I work for Highest and Days Foundation. And I just wanted to comment that I'm very pleased that as you discuss the value of urban ministry and the different issues that come up, some of the theme that has resounded with me is a discussion around us and them. Keeping in mind that the them is the church. Isolation from the body. And this is important in day and age. And the fact that health disparities and the structural barriers that exist in our urban cities are things that you're thinking about, because I think that's where the work is. And I think that as we talk about the body and isolation from the body, the work is there. And I just want to say I appreciate the discussion this morning. I think the other thing that I wanted to talk about is for years I worked with Reverend Warren Dennis on a project we call One Conversation, where we wanted to bring the issue of HIV and its impact in urban cities into church setting. And I guess what I want to say, I want to put it on record, that when we look at urban cities, we've got to look at the structural barriers, the disparities in health that exist there, and that we need to meet people where they are on the ground. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Cassandra Foster, and my question, I guess, was kind of in reference to continuing off of what the dear sister in the rear said. As far as insularity within our churches that we have existing, and then the polarization between us and them, how do we start breaking down those barriers? Because it's wonderful to talk about what the barriers are, but the thing I'm more interested in is how do we actually address them and start a plan of action into making it happen so that there's no more barriers. Because it should be, if we are one body in Christ, we should be able to reach out to people who are not in our churches, and there should be a comfort level, because as Christ was, Christ wouldn't have been just in the church. Christ would have been out in the street, addressing the people that need to be addressed, addressing the hurt, the sick, the weak. And my question is, how do we start breaking down those barriers? What is the start of a plan of action if it has not been addressed already? And how is that going to be incorporated, or how would that best be incorporated into our theological education?
I have a practical idea. And that is and it comes from the field of congregational studies, which has been around for a long time, and that is to enable our students, equip our theological students to equip congregations to do their own community studies. So not just that the clergy know how to do community analysis, but you know how to lead congregations to do the community studies. So just a very quick story. I was called to work with a congregation that was declining, and they wanted me to consult with them. And so we started, I went in, and it was an all-white congregation in a rapidly changing neighborhood, becoming Latino. And I said, well, tell me about the neighborhood. And these older white ladies said, oh, well, these women, Puerto Rican women, they just keep having babies and they're just, living the life, get on public assistance, and I'm just, going, okay, God, keep me calm. I said, well, why don't we do a little research? So we had the five of them, we developed together a little interview format. They were each to go out and interview 5 people in the neighborhood they didn't know. And one of the questions they came up with, which is a great research question, is tell me about a typical day in your life. And so we came back after a month. These 5 women had done interviews. They come back with 20. They were changed. Amen. And they came back and they said, oh my gosh, what these women have to deal with. They have the hardest lives. And they described what their days were like. And out of that, they, first of all, there was no amount of terrific preaching that could have brought that transformation in a month. And they had to get out and see, and we framed it as a research project. And so out of this came, they developed a program, Mom's Morning Out, and they had yoga class, and then the people in the church provided childcare so these women could get a break, no pressure, no hard sell, and then gradually this became a Latino church. So I think the practical, simple answer: get folks to do their own work.
I want to echo and give a personal experience, and I'm going to say I'm out of my depth here, but I'll give a personal experience. Many years ago, when the AIDS crisis was just in its flowering, I tried to do some AIDS programming in my own faith institution, and I found that I was getting great resistance. And the pastor is a very progressive pastor. And I was saying, why are we getting this pushback? And it's only because it tested my own faith, because I said I want to leave this, I don't want these people who are retrograde and just shunning people. And I put on my professional lens, and I saw the church as an organization that is a political organization. And it's only when I put it on that lens and started to understand the push and pull that the pastor had to face, that I understood that your question is an important question. Why can't we just go past the divisions? We have to accept that we can't just do that, that you have to educate people, you have to pull them along. It's not an easy process, but it can be done. Now, AIDS ministry is de rigueur. It's not in my own institution. No one looks at it askance. But you had to go through that period of education, people experiencing it in their own families, experiencing the fact that Uncle so-and-so has a male lover, and that's okay. But you have to go through that. You can't skip the step.
The idea of action reflection, kind of thing, that putting the theory into practice is basically the dynamic, and there's always some tension in that. As Dr. Dennis likes to say, it's messy, but you can't have the one without the other.
My name's Warren Lassane Jr. I am the executive for a region that stretches from North Carolina to Delaware. It's the Synod of the Mid-Atlantic. Good to see Presbyterians up here. I come to you from a meeting in Baltimore yesterday, and having met with the Presbytery of Baltimore and them making presentations about what recently happened in Baltimore and people being placed in small groups to brainstorm about what they can do. And a lot of the ideas were what I call kind of toxic charity kinds of things that really doesn't get us out of this situation that we're in. So I'm hearing your conversations through that experience and need your help. And the question or the help that's needed is when these opportunities happen for conversations and involvement, how can this community or how can the seminaries or how can bodies like this make themselves available to groups that are already out there and they need the help, they want the help, it's a pregnant period of possibilities happening. What can be done in response to that, that the knowledge, the ideas, the passion gets out there in a more direct way?
Thank you, Dr. Hussein. I think that you really do have to seize the moment, because one of the reasons that you got so much pushback in the congregation, or this is hard to do, is because there's a tremendous cultural ethos against that that's in our society. I mean, the politics of division is, we see it rife in Washington, but we acculturate people not to trust one another. These days, you know, you can't really blame parents for saying don't talk to strangers when they're dealing with their children. So this is the social pattern. And in my experience, the society doesn't really listen. Religion is seen as a special interest group in the wider society, so that it's not taken seriously until there is a crisis. So nobody is interested in what the church has to say until there is a crisis. And dealing with a project in Washington, D.C., where gentrification is, you know, really pushing churches out. You know, with parking, you know, legalities and so forth. But when there's a crisis, such as in Baltimore, or the shooting in Newtown, then we run to the churches. So we really have to seize the moment to set in place those opportunities for cross-cultural and interdisciplinary dialogue that need to take place, so that once this issue dies down, for instance, in Baltimore, we don't allow it. You know, there needs to be some seeds planted for systemic interaction and change.
And I think I saw a letter that was sent out by a denominational group, not Presbyterians, and I'm not going to say who it is, but sort of what can we do coming out of Baltimore? And it was this toxic charity. It was, well, we've been there at the demonstrations offering water to the people who are demonstrating. And we want to beef up our summer day camps so kids stuff. I mean, these are all good things, right? But it's a denomination that I know is losing membership. And I was also moved in the midst of the crisis, the pastor Jamal Bryant, who preached the funeral service, and he, I thought, did a great job of going right on that knife edge of being very pastoral and in the moment, and talking about the systemic issues of injustice that led to this. And then he and other clergy were up all night, and they were the restraining force. They were there in the midst of it. They were the restraining force, locking arms. And I venture to say that those churches that are giving out water and are on the sidelines are going to continue to decline, and those churches that are involved and really physically involved are going to be flourishing because they're relevant and they're there. And So I think, one thing for mainline Protestant denominations and historic Black denominations that are thinking about this is it's in our self-interest to be involved. Because this is what people who are staying away from the church, the number one reason is it's boring. And it's not related to what the realities of our lives are. And so, if you can even crassly package it as self-interest to be involved, that might be the language some congregations speak.
Hello, my name is Nicole Simpson, and I'm stating that I'm a CFP by vocation. So my question is directly targeted to Dr. Rowland and anyone else that can address it. The conversation around economic depression has gone largely unaddressed. So how do we put it into the forefront, not as a passing byline, not only in theological institutions and our local congregations, but also in the communities that already know that they're economically depressed?
That's a wonderful question. I think we are not addressing it as much as we should, because we're still under the pangloss that everything will get better in 7 months. We have the notion that all will return to normalcy before 2008 happened. And when we get to the point where we understand that there is a new normal, that wages have stagnated for the last 20 to 30 years in this country, I think we'll have a new conversation. But I don't think we are there yet. I think there are others who are there, understand, are taking advantage of it. But I don't think that as American citizens, we are ready for that conversation. Because, quite frankly, think about it. What will we do when we achieve the same level of status as you fought for? That is a very difficult and untenable place to be in democracy. And that's why we really do need a fundamental conversation, which I don't see happening very
Yes, my name is Howard Bryant, a retired working pastor. I'd like to just maybe address two things and briefly. One, you asked what could we do in order to make the church relevant. The Presbyterian Church is embarked upon a study that they call it New Beginnings, and they're doing it all across the country. I'm at the congregation now. I've been there a year and a half. The first of the year, we had a person who came in and looked at the building and gave all the facts about the building. Then we had a windshield tour of the community. And then we talked to the finance people, and then I talked with the congregation. The point is that they developed an analysis of who we were, and the congregation was shocked to know that we had a junk building that was ready to fall down. We didn't have any money, and we were afraid to go out into the community. This is an all-white congregation that I'm working with. But the thing that has really inspired me is that because of that analysis of themselves, then they are aware, and they are really now attempting to find how can we really be the church in this place where we are. Mr. Amon talked about, buildings and things. We have all these buildings, but it does not make the church, but we have to get to it. The second thing, I'm now working also with community access, and we're attempting to build an interfaith community. Last week, I met with a group in New Jersey, in Union County. 8 clergy there, 8 white men and 1 black man. And after I told them that we were interfaith, and I invited them, I said, we'll advertise anything you want in our newsletter. Only 2 people gave me their name and email address. I mean, and you did tell us this morning, and the question was raised, if we do not become interfaith, then we are dead.
In going back to this issue of how do we really reach out and do that, those of us who fancy ourselves really Christians or committed to Jesus Christ in some way need to recognize that we often talk about the language of being prophetic in the face of injustice, but prophets were always very vulnerable people. In the academy, you know, there's no such thing as a tenured prophet. And so we need to look at these and I find our witness even in churches is muted because some of our leadership is timid, or what will the people react and so forth. And sometimes, you know, to really speak out and to begin to deal with the kinds of injustices that we face, we have to deal with ourselves. The lady spoke about HIV/AIDS, and I remember I could relate to your situation. I was in a congregation once, and the guy had HIV/AIDS, and became ill, and the mom called me, you know, he needs to go to hospital, Rev, he won't, you know, I know you have influence with him, you know, and so I had just gotten a new car, it had cloth seats, and I was worried about whether or not this guy was going to get sick on my new car seats, you know? And I had to deal with my own head to say, you know, am I more worried about this than about this person? So. And we, you know, dealt with that on a number of issues. So we have to deal with ourselves in terms of the risks, the new normal. 3 weeks ago, a dude was shot in the mouth down the street from the church where I am. Went to, not a member of the church, just I knew it was on the corner from the church, and I said, oh, that's right around the corner from the church. Went to see that. Went to visit him in the hospital, and tubes everywhere, and said, well, you know, we'll just conclude our talk with the Lord's Prayer, you know, with the Lord's Prayer. 19 years old, didn't know it. New normal, okay, in terms of that. And so how do you begin to reach out and make those kinds of connections? And I mentioned that only because that was an education for Ronald Peters in terms of dealing with the new normal.
I just wanted to add to that conversation as well. When we did our consultation in DC, that issue actually came up about the church being insular, and Christianity is just insular pretty much in practice because we're so sanctified. We sanctify ourselves in inclusion without being inclusive. So someone mentioned that there was, I think what the answer to that, or maybe not the answer, but one way is, a recommendation is that we need to collaborate more with other churches and with other institutions. And then, because there was one ministry in Southeast DC, it was called the Southeast White House in Southeast DC. It was a collaborative ministry with 5 or 6 non-denominational churches that all got together, came outside their doors to meet the needs of one community. They offered job services, homeless feeding. So instead of competing with each other for all the individual ministries, oh, there's this down the street, no, we have a better one here, they got together and they had one collaborative food bank and one collaborative job center. And they come together. It's not about fundraising. It's not about, they pool all their resources together so they can work together and do that. So I think if we work as churches collaboratively with other churches and with other institutions in forums like this, where we're all reaching out and becoming accustomed to the dialogue. Thank you. Oh, and I also want to add, sorry, that we did, to your point about HIV and AIDS in the church, we did a co-sponsorship with Union Theological Seminary and the New York State Department of Health. Do no harm in churches with people with HIV and AIDS and with the LGBT community, and very few churches showed up. But it did start the dialogue, and it wasn't about are you for it or against it, should it be in the church, it's a sin. It wasn't about that. It was about even if you don't agree, how can you do no harm? these are God's children, and how can we move forward from that place? So, again, with the collaborations.
Last question. Two more questions, two final questions, one and then two.
Good morning, Iola Williams. I am both an MDiv and DMin student of New Brunswick, and Dr. Dennis, my very first professor. I just wanted to go back to the defining of urban for a moment, and I like the words plural and inclusive, but what I found over the years is that the realities of what we see even in our mind's eye as an urban city, those realities are also found in the rural cities as well. And even though it's hard to find the studies and the numbers in those areas, but in this time in my life, after being in the ministry for 20 years, I find myself pastoring a church in a rural area. And when I look around, I see some of those same things that you might find in the inner cities. And I'm not talking about the liquor stores on every corner or churches on every corner or people hanging out on every corner. What I'm talking about is the hopelessness and the dependency and all of those things. And I just want to hear a word on those rural areas as I look out the church door and see those things. But knowing that I'm not in New York City, I'm not in Brooklyn, I'm not in New Brunswick, you know, I'm in a little town called Frederica, that if you sneeze, you go through it. But there's a section of it that some of us might refer to as the hood. For me, it's a term of endearment, as the hood. Can we just say a word about those areas?
Thank you for that. One of the things that I often hear is people will say, well, I'm in a rural area and they have the same problems as the city, and that's kind of only identifying cities as sets of problems. You know, like drug addiction knows no geographical bounds, or crime knows no geographical bounds. But one of the differences, and so I caution against just identifying cities as the place of problems. But cities are also the places of resources. And the real difference that I see with urban and rural is that in rural areas, there isn't the access to so many of the resources that you have in urban areas. And so it places a particular challenge. You can't just say, you know, encounter someone and say, oh, well, let's plug them into this and let's plug them into that, because this and that don't exist out there. So I think then the real challenge for clergy is how then does congregational ministry diversify and embrace folks with all kinds of issues and find ways of addressing them. So it's a hard place to be.
To that point, I've always maintained, as a matter of fact, in my book, I identify 4 myths that typically that are associated with urban ministry, like urban ministry is something other than Christian ministry, which is one. Christianity was born in the city, you know, Ephesus, Rome, you know, Thessalonica, Philippi, go through that, you know, it's born in the cities. Jerusalem, you know, and the other myth is ethics versus evangelism. Are we going to deal with, you know, injustices, or are we going to just try to save souls? That's another myth. How can you save souls without dealing with, you know, with those? That's right. And vice versa. A third and one of the other myth is this rural versus urban. That's also a myth. If it goes, speak to this in terms of what was said, alienation is not a regional issue. Okay, people are alienated. You can be in the city surrounded by people, but you don't trust none of them. You know this kind of thing. So you don't feel close to anyone, and that also is typified in the rural area. I'm a native in New Orleans. In Katrina, New Orleans got all of the ink in the press, but the heaviest damage was in the rural areas. That's where the direct hit was, and so we have to, do away with this urban versus myth kind of thing. You want to really see how drug abuse and such, as you also advise, that's in the rural, some of these rural areas, and suburban areas as well. It's very much there. But the other myth is we have to come to grips with urban as code word for bad. Urban as code, that's the, we have to move away from this sociological definition of urban as the place of crime, the place of dysfunction and so forth, and move toward a theological thing of urban as theological symbol. What about the urban being the kingdom of God? Amen. All right? Read Revelations. And God is in the midst of the people. And when God is in the midst of the people, this is how we move away from the symbol of urban as bad. You understand? The Tower of Babel, where human pride gives rise to dysfunction, in alienation, and inability to communicate, as opposed to the Acts 2 model, where right there in the city, when people are there, seeking God's presence under the influence of the Holy Spirit, people who don't even speak the same language, all of a sudden are on the same page and can work together. So we need to move together to redefine urban not as a geographic place, but as a theological symbol for the kingdom of God.
Last question in the back.
Bernadette Glover, with much appreciation for Dr. Warren Dennis, who has been a gift not only to this institution, but a gift to many regions in our country, and his reach has gone global. Thanks be to God for him and the panel's discussion today. Question, how do the structures of theological education mirror the structures of the city?
These also are her students.
Oh, yeah.
Welcome to the center.
The imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. We really, and internalized depression is a sad thing. We want to be like the emperor. This is one of the reasons why the runaway popularity of the program Empire. And don't get it twisted. I want to see what cookie and myself. And all of the things. But it calls us, and faith in God calls us to a different model rather than that hierarchical model. And so that's what we find, and that's what I find in education and theological education. Absent caring, the mentoring piece is lost in pedagogy. And so we have to be careful, I think, and I don't think it has to be that way. I think we can build structures that do it. I was nurtured in one. And all my life, my Sunday school teacher was also my vice principal. So, that kind of thing. In college, the president of Southern University walked the campus and talked to the students. He was not this high and uplifted person who was never there. And we need to model that in theological education so that it's not, and that's one of the reasons why we're all here today, because we have been privileged to know a man who modeled that in terms of his pedagogy. He was interested in his students. Go visit the churches, visit their homes, and gotten in all their personal business. Because that's spiritual formation, and it changes the outcome. So that
my thing is, we have to reconnect information with caring.
No, I'm sorry, too.
Give the last words of Dr. Warren.
I'm sorry, too. Write this down. NBTS is noted worldwide for its urban focus. Name one distinguishing characteristic for a new urban focus. Name one distinguishing characteristic for a new urban focus. Look to your right and look to your left. That is your neighbor at your table for table conversation as we eat together. Most folks in this room, a lot of folks in this room, know that part of the classroom pedagogy is the use of World Cafe to have a conversation with the understanding that conversation changes things. All right, so our conversation at table for your participation is a conversation around that one question. What is the distinguishing characteristic going forward? I want to thank Dr. Dale Irvin to be the moderator. We have not seen each other in 2 years, but we do communicate either by text or by email. And I emailed him and asked him would he do me a kind favor to moderate this session. He did not hesitate to say, hey. I have many friends who I have journeyed with in this journey of ministry. This brother would come by covered wagon to be here. He almost did come by covered wagon to be here late at night, arriving tired, having done Presbyterian committee work, because that's what we do. We meet in committees. I want to thank Dr. Ron Peters for his work. The same is true for Katie and I. We haven't seen each other in quite some time. But what we do is that we make an effort when life is eventful for one or the other to be present for the endowment of your chair. And I brought a student with me, Diane Holloway. We drove down because we wanted to be there. Amen. For the endowment of your chair. And I thank you for being here as well. Dr. Roland Angel and I have seen each other more than I've seen these people. Oftentimes at Makiba, nice Ethiopian restaurant downtown New Brunswick, occasionally that we have had lunch together and conversation together. And so I invited him, I called Roland around October, November last year, and I have him on the phone and have him on Facebook, and he answered, and I told him what I wanted. He said, let me jot it down and get it on my calendar now. He did not hesitate. And so I'm not preaching, I'm just thanking folks.
It's time for lunch, Dr. D.
Okay, now, so I want to say thank you to you. And y'all can clap for him. Now, if you ever, you need to find this person in your church. You need to find this person in your church. You want a person like this person. You want this person in your church to move your church to the next level. So, Deborah Robinson is a friend of Dr. Warren L. Dennis. Thank you.
Remember the last thing when we were in ministry studies and I was so upset because I had so much in me to say and you were doing this here? Got to go. Remember what you told me what that means? Got to go. Okay, sit down. Thank you.
Oh Lord, we thank you for what our eyes have seen, what our ears have heard, and for what our hearts have felt. As you dismiss us for this time of renewal and refreshment, be our unseen guest at table, inspiring our conversation. And we will give you the thanks. Thank you for the food that we're about to receive, that it might nourish our conversation and our bodies. Thank you for all the hands that have prepared it. And make us ever mindful of those who do not have community, who do not have food to eat, shelter over their heads. Be their shelter in their time of need, and be in our ministry as we give thought to them. We ask this in thy Son Jesus' name and for his sake. And the church said,